All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. On today's cast, I have a good buddy of mine, Kevin Paul Scott. If you are not familiar with Kevin, Kevin is an author. He's an entrepreneur. He is a savant in leadership, and just an overall good dude. And that's why I wanted to ask him and so graciously have him come on and just kind of talk with us and talk to y'all. And kind of he's got a very, very awesome way, I think, with words and changing the perception of things and good and putting a good spin on things. So Kevin, I know you're a busy dude, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Man, this is fun. My only regret is that it's not in person. Be way more fun. We've known each other for a while now.
Yeah. We've how did we meet actually?
So we were in Nashville at an event. And here's what I remember. I remember being extremely frustrated because I walked in after some speaking engagement to some generic buffet food. It was at a nice hotel, but your wife had been out shopping and she brings you back some like amazing spread of food, and I'm stuck with the regular hotel food. So
I forgot about that
this
actually.
guy's figured something out. I think you also got like cowboy boots or something like that. So it was a
Oh
cool
yeah,
trip.
yeah. You had on the baby blue bird's eye, if I remember correctly.
And that's when we hit it off. We started talking about suits. I think it was me and you and Justin.
Yeah. I used to wear suits on the reg, and now this is kind of like the uniform.
Yeah, that's right. Dressed up.
Well, dude, I wanted to get your perspective because, a lot of what you say, it's so good when it's in person, and whenever you're saying it to a captive audience. So it's kind of like a joke where maybe somebody misses the punchline, and it's like, I guess you had to be there. So my hope is that lots of people watch this, and my hope is that lots of your positivity and a few of the nuggets that you have in your everyday disciplines and your business and just really your mindset, people are able to kind of to digest some of this because it's so good. So from a leadership perspective, like in your mind, what does leadership mean to you? Like what does that look like for you?
Yeah. John Maxwell has famously said that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And I'm not trying to make news by discounting John Maxwell, like he's like the ultimate leader guy. But if it was just influence, then we don't need the word leadership. We just use the word influence. So I believe that leadership is influence that leads to action. And so you can influence somebody's beliefs, but when you begin to influence their behaviors is when you really, I believe, start to lead. And I think every single one of us have an opportunity to lead because we do have an opportunity to influence. How do you do that? Two key things. One, you got to be really honest with people where they are. So if you don't acknowledge where people are, I don't think you can lead effectively. But then at the same time, you've got to cast a vision of where you can go. And in the market that we're in right now, and I'm not just talking about real estate or homes, I'm talking about the market for everything. I think a lot of people are looking for leadership because they're looking for somebody to tell them, hey, right where we are right now is not where we want to be. We want to be somewhere else. And the only way we get somewhere else is if somebody somewhere leads us. So if somebody's listening to this right now, they've either looking for a leader or they need to look in the mirror because maybe they're the leader that their company, their family, their community, their church needs.
Yeah, I heard somebody say one time, leaders lead, and there's no manuscript, there's no playbook, no blueprint. Everybody's got a different leadership style. It's interesting is that looking back on my life, I got a dose of one style of leadership very early when I was 17. I went into the Marines, and the leadership there is it's not iron fist-ish, but I mean, it kind of at the same time is. It's like, you must do what I say. Because here's the deal. You're under contract. You can't be like, yeah, dog, this really ain't working for me. I'm going to leave. I don't know what's going on with my computer's going crazy, but you can't just like quit, and I'm going to get rid of my messages here, see if I can quit this. And but yeah, I mean, You can't be like, yeah, I've had enough of this. This isn't really working out for me. So you must adapt. It's adapt or die. And so what ends up happening is that you adapt that leadership style and you realize very quickly in real world applications, like one thing that I struggled with in my, I would say mid 20s is that I'm fresh out of the core is that like not everybody responds well to that type of leadership because they're not under contract. And if they want to quit, they can quit. And I heard another quote one time, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I was told that, you know, people don't leave companies, they leave leadership. They could work for not a very good company, but if the leadership is great inside of that company, they'll stick because of that leadership, because of that fortification or that knowledge or that guidance, for a lack of a better term. Or just the opposite. If you have poor leadership or you have poor example setting, it could be the greatest company in the world, but poor leadership will run all the talent off in the world. I mean, what do you think about that? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Number one, I think it is 100% true that people don't leave businesses, they leave people. They leave poor leaders, poor managers. So, and you're right, the style matters. You've got to be able to adapt. You know, you and I both like sports. The greatest coaches who sustain success over time, they have a system they implement, but they're able to tailor it to the players. And so as times change and things are different, you got to be able to adapt. That's number one. Can I also say this though? My advice to young people as they're looking for their early jobs is to focus on choosing the leaders, not the right company always. I mean, you may take a job in your 20s where you make a little bit less money. Maybe that company was not as prestigious as the other one, or it's not as well known, but the leaders that you surround yourself with in your early years will have a disproportionate impact on the rest of your life and your career. And so, uh, as much as you're choosing a company, you should be choosing your boss early on. And by the way, if you do that well, what you learn and what you want to do and not do, I think it'll make you a better boss down the road.
I agree. You know, it's so cliche, but you know, show me your circle and I'll show you your future cliche. It's so corny because it's regurgitated like over and over and different examples of such or the way it's phrased, but it's so true. I remember, you know, when I got out of the Corps, going back to, I was 23, I think 24, I befriended this guy at our local golf course and he was like the guy's guy. You know what I mean? Like I showed up and he appeared to be like living the dream. Brand new BMW. He had like creases in his golf shorts. And I'm just so like what I remember to myself is like I'm like on a wrinkle bomb basically. You know, I'm like getting out of the car, just got off of work and I'm gonna go hit some balls. I mean, he was like pressed for success. And he came over to me the one day. He's like, "Hey man, I'm gonna go play a few holes. You want to join?" I was like, "Hell yeah!" So we start talking, and then it's deciphered. He's a few years older than me. I think I was like 24, maybe. I think he was like 28, 29. And I was like, you know, what do you do? And so he goes on to say that, do you remember those antennas that you could like put on your cell phone back in the day that whenever it would ring, it would like light up?
Yeah,
Remember
yeah.
that? So he created like these kiosks with his brother, and he was in the Air Force at the time. And then he grew like a kiosk into two kiosks into like 12 kiosks, sold that business, and then rolled the profits into buying a franchise of ADT, like the home security company.
Yeah.
And he became like the biggest distributor for ADT on the East Coast at like 29. And so I just remember at that point, getting out of the military is somewhat confusing, challenging because you go from one extremity to like another. And there's nuggets in there. That's a completely different story for a completely different time. But I will always remember we were sitting on the tee box and I was like, what advice could you give for me? Like at this point in my life, I'm young, very hungry, very money motivated. And he just said, you got to find the five most successful people that you can and just hang on to them. Very rarely is there a person who's successful by total happenstance. There's
Yeah.
mannerisms that are built into them. There are things that they do, daily disciplines, mentality. They're willing to do things that other people won't. And you start to surround yourself with people who move like that, think like that, act like that. You can't help but it's almost like if somebody's sick, if you hang around a bunch of sick people, you're going to get sick. If you hang around a bunch of successful people, you're going to get successful only because you're mimicking what other people are doing around you. And I found that like that in the long term at that moment in my life, it served me so well, because it's so true. It's going back to what you just said, is like, I'm so glad that Curtis was in my life at 24, because had he not been, I don't know. Not to say I wouldn't be where here or having this conversation with you, but he definitely shaped the trajectory of my life for sure.
Yeah. And I would just give people one more thing to think about when they're thinking about and you could be 30, 40, 50, 60 listening to this. You still want to be finding people who are successful that you can be around. And I love the way John Gardner says it. He says, I pity the leader caught between unloving critics and uncritical lovers. And what he's telling us is, as a leader, you don't want on one end people who are unloving critics. I mean, you don't want to be around somebody who just tells you you suck all the time, that you're
Yeah.
not good, you're not, like, here's all the things you're doing wrong. It's not life-giving. But a lot of times we do gravitate to people on the other end, the people that he calls uncritical lovers. These are the people that, man, they just tell you everything you're doing is great. Hey, man, I showed up for work, giving it half my effort. I'm late. And somebody says, man, that's all right. Like, you want somebody who loves you enough to give you the encouragement when you need it, but also a kick in the butt when you need it too. Uh, the right kind of mentors, leaders, bosses do both of those successfully.
Yeah. You take me back to the beginning of the conversation. We were talking about sports. I'm a huge sports nut. Alabama, not my favorite school.
But Nick Saban, man.
Nick Saban. I mean, the thing is that when you talk about leaders and you talk about eras and dynasties, I mean, that guy realistically will go down as one of the greatest leaders of men, because what he's able to do, it's not, he didn't just have one and done. And I remember him saying a quote one time during COVID. There was a video that leaked of him recruiting in Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I have forever wanted to get inside the mind of somebody that's at that level, because it's just so intriguing to me. It's like, how do you appeal to people that are at the absolute tip of the spear? They're the best of the absolute best. And you're constantly creating value enough in them to where they're choosing, they're not forced. They're choosing to want to come play either for you or with you. And what level of influence do you have? At what level are you putting people in a better position? Are you leaving them in a better place than where you ultimately found them? And there was a quote in there, and I just will remember this too. He said, good players want to be coached hard. Great players want to be told the truth. And that kind of goes back to what you were just saying, is the unloving. You don't have to ride people's rear ends all the time, right? Or just grind them into the dirt. But you have to be honest with them. You have to set the standard. Do you not?
Yep. I'm in full agreement. And it's interesting because you talked a little bit about the Marine style of leadership.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I probably grew up on the opposite end of that spectrum in a almost equally. You talked about how that type doesn't work everywhere, but I grew up in a type that was all about pleasing people. It's all about, and if your number one desire is to please people all the time, you will also not be an effective leader.
Yeah.
Somebody said it this way, that a person's success in life can often be measured by the number of uncomfortable conversations that they're willing to have each day. And uncomfortable doesn't mean being a jerk. It just means leaning into things that may not be popular and may not be fun.
Saw this thing on Instagram over the weekend that it said stress is just a tough conversation you did not want to deal with.
Man, that one hits. That one.
It does. I was like, oh, that's me. Like, sometimes, frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, dude, let's keep it moving. So, I heard you say one time, you came and you talked to our group a couple years ago. I remember calling you and I'm like, dude, we need a vitamin more than ever. This is like 2022. And we went from like riding high, 2020, 2021, 6 months of 2022 was best years ever. Hashtag. And then everything just kind of shifts on a dime, and people were still disproportionately living in the past. Sometimes I think there are still people in our world who are unwilling to accept what the current state of affairs are. It's like a joke, but it's like Al Bundy, who talks about the 4 touchdowns he scored in one game like 30 years ago, right? I mean, that's not current times. So you started off the talk and you gave an analogy about when you go to the eye doctor and you're looking at the wall. So why don't you tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
this one resonates. Well, I turned 40 this year. That was a couple of years before. My wife made me go to the eye doctor because she, as much as I want to think that I'm not getting older, she could tell when when I was driving the car, like it's not as good as it used to be. It's a little unsafe at night, and I remember when I went to the eye doctor, they put these charts on the wall. They're actually like behind you on a wall now, and you're looking through a mirror. But then they put these giant lenses down in front of your eyes, and they're trying to get your prescription right, A or B, number one or number two, better or worse. And something that struck me at that moment was I realized the chart isn't changing. The lens with which I look through is changing. And so it's causing me to see it differently. And I just thought about how that applies to so many areas of our life. The market is not going to just change immediately. My team is not going to change overnight. My current financial situation, it really doesn't change that fast, but my perspective can change. And I always, I'm always a little bit hesitant to share this because when I tell people, if you change your perspective, you can change your life. And some people kind of roll their eyes. Some people love that stuff. They're like, yeah, give me all the motivational, give me the Instagram content that's going to get me pumped up. And other people are like, that's just like that's fluffy. That's not real life. But here's what I found. Perspective is actually the only thing in the world that can radically transform the results you get without altering a single element of your environment. Meaning, if you're listening to this right now, when you get off of this, when you turn off the phone, when you close out the video, all the problems in your life are still going to be there. But if you'll change your perspective just by changing the way you view things, it can change how you do things. And if you change how you do things, you change the results. So, I mean, there is a Bible verse. Now, nobody cut us off on this one here, but it says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. So the principle is the way that you see yourself and the way that you see the world affects the way that you are. And I think it's important whether you're in a season of that's not as fun or you're in a good season, you got to remind yourself that your perspective is ultimately important because your perspective really can change your life. Can I share one other thought on that?
Of course.
I saw this weekend. I don't know why lately, but there's been a lot of conversations about just back what happened in the Holocaust. And I remember one of the books that I read that really shaped my life was Viktor Frankl's book called Man's Search for Meaning. This is a guy who endured the horrors of a concentration camp. And I love this quote. If a guy like this can say it, any of us can say this. He said that the last of human freedoms is our ability to change our attitude in any given set of circumstances. Here's what I'm saying. When everything else is stripped away from you, you can still choose your attitude.
Yeah.
And to me, your attitude shapes your perspective.
I know that we know this, but I'm just going to be just to the brim with cliche statements today, but the life is not what happens to you, it's how you react to it.
Yeah.
It's something that I have to stop and remind myself. I feel like quite frequently because, I pride myself on consistency and stability. I remember having a conversation with you, or I think we were somewhere together, and you were saying, yeah, like nobody really wakes up and is like, if my career could be a little less stable, that would be great. And if my income situation was a little less stable, that would also be really cool. So the stability aspect of it, whenever you achieve stability, the thing that you have to, or I myself struggle with from time to time, is like nothing lasts forever, regardless of how good you are. Dynasty, no dynasty. Success, no success. Downfall, no downfall. Hard times, whatever the case may be. Legitimately, nothing lasts forever. And I find that even with me being vulnerable for a moment, one thing that I struggle with is that we've had a good clip of success, and the business has changed. And because the business is changing, people are changing the way that they think. Now, with that being said, we run a certain type of offense here. So we have a playbook that caters to a particular type of individual. At least I think so anyways. And it sets a broad, I guess you could say a broad stroke of overall talent. But we're not for everybody, and vice versa. However, I think that as markets change and businesses change, people are willing to make brash decisions, thinking that this is going to be a silver bullet, for a lack of a better term, or this is going to solve problems instantaneously, and not really realizing or thinking full frame, or trying to see down the road the repercussions or the ramifications of the decisions that they're about to make or that they have already made. So, I mean, talk to us a little bit about that.
Man, I think this is something that we all struggle with, but we have to consciously fight against it. I talk about this in terms of, I talk about exchanging or giving up the immediate for the ultimate. How do you give up? But the quote that has shaped my life in this area was the late, great Zig Ziglar. He said this. He said, the chief cause of failure and unhappiness is trading what we want most for what we want now. Here's what he's saying. The chief cause, which means the number one cause, if you find somebody in life who's failed or they're not happy, the number one reason is that at some point or multiple points along the way, they gave up what they wanted most for what they wanted now. What I want most is to be successful in my career. What I want now is to not put in the extra work.
Yeah.
What I want most is to be a great dad at home. What I want right now is to zone out and not be present with my kids. What I want most, and look, we all want things that bring us pleasure, excitement, satisfaction in the short term. But if you consistently choose what's going to bring you satisfaction in the short term, you sacrifice your future on the altar of the immediate. You give up what you really want for a temporary satisfaction. And that's why you get down the road and you regret it. And here's the thing. It's easy to say that. It's a lot tougher to do it.
Oh yeah.
And so you've got to figure out how to keep something in your mind, clear of your mind about what you want for your future that is compelling enough so that you will resist the need for the immediate satisfaction. Somebody said it this way, the only way to make your present better is to make your future brighter. And so we've got to be seeing something ahead that is worth sacrificing now for.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, I myself, I'm sure that I speak for a lot of people when I say this, but I myself, I struggle with that mightily. And I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying, leaning on years of mistake making has helped me make less mistakes in my current state of affairs. And, the failing forward terminology, or however you want to phrase that, it's a real thing. And I try, and when I'm guiding, or when I'm coaching, or when I'm mentoring, or when I'm working with our team, or even people that are outside of our team, just trying to help people in general. It's like, how do you guide somebody away from like lopping off their nose to spite their face?
Yeah.
Like it's like a crash, you know what I'm saying? That you can, like, if you're standing at an intersection and you see you're about to see a collision, and you're like, oh man. And then you're like, the only thing that you can do is, you can't clearly say, you know what I mean? Like, you can't clearly say, oh my God, you're about to get hit by a car. And it's challenging. It's challenging when you're caught up in the moment, because a lot of times, from my experience, and I'd love to get your insight, but a lot of times these decisions are not made. They're made under duress. They're made emotionally. They're not made logically. And they're not sitting there thinking like, hey, if I do this, it could take away the sting, but it won't heal the wound.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, this all comes back to, you've got to be really clear about your goals or your vision or your purpose. Again, those are things that, depending on your personality type, you're like, I don't need all that stuff. But without a compelling goal or vision or purpose, you're not going to be consistently willing to get through the things you're talking about. I think all of us can kind of muscle through it every once in a while, but you're not going to do it day after day, week after week, year after year without some compelling goal down the road. I find this, our company helps create different programs for businesses. And in some of our programs, the audience is younger people. And I actually find that it's usually a few years after college or that age that uh, those individuals find themselves pretty aimless, because up to that point they had a clear goal. Like, the goal is to graduate, the goal is to get my first job, the goal is to get into college, the goal is to whatever the goals are. And so I say this all the time: when the purpose is clear, the mundane becomes meaningful.
Yep.
They were willing to do mundane things because they had a clear goal. When you lack a goal, you won't do the things that are necessary. And one of the things in your industry in particular that I think has been fascinating to watch is how many, I'm probably get in trouble for saying this, but how many people who weren't that good, who were able to make a lot of money for a few years when it was good, like, they didn't have to do all the things. They had to work hard, but they were able to take orders. And now you begin to see the people who are really successful have to be continually setting goals, putting in the work, and doing a lot of mundane stuff to get to the meaningful outcomes.
It's so interesting that you bring that up again, because the truth of the matter is that uh, it's very true. It's a very real thing. Perfect circumstances in a whirlwind of sequences that had to have happened created perfect storm opportunities for every person that was in this business for a run, realistically, like we had never seen. And it's arguable that we'll never see it again.
Yeah.
And when you're able to accomplish things that you've never been able to accomplish before with ease, your brain will start to trick you a little bit into thinking that you're better than you actually are. It's not like, and I'm not saying this for everybody, so this is not a broad statement, but at the same time, it kind of is. So I don't mean to be talking out of both sides of my mouth, but the truth of the matter is that in mass, there's many, many originators in our world who just happened to be in the business. They didn't have solid business plans. There was so much of it that they could like not get back to people and still be a wild success by most people's definitions. And then those circumstances changed. That waterfall of opportunity and perfect situations dissipated, and it completely like it evaporated. It was
Yep.
like water hitting a hot frying pan. Just as you had it in surplus, it was gone like that the next day. And it leaves people searching. It leaves people wanting. And rather than just chalking it up to being like, wow, it's like if anybody's ever played blackjack, it's like, man, that was a run like I've never seen before. You know what I mean? But you can't expect that every single card that you're going to get is going to be blackjack, 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 blackjack. And that's what we dealt with for 2 years. Okay. So
Yep.
anyways, where am I going with this? People are still living in that. I do a majority of the recruiting here for our team and for our branch. And I can't, it's not a turn off per se, but I cannot help but feel like when I speak to somebody new and I say, tell me your story. And the first thing they say, or at the beginning of the conversation is, yeah, in 2020. And I'm like, oh boy, like, man, that was 4 years ago. That was almost 5 years ago at this point. Like,
Yeah.
professional organizations are not living. I know you do a lot of work with Chick-fil-A. I can't imagine that the executive leadership team in Chick-fil-A is saying, whew, 20, if only we could get 2020 back. In 2020, in 2021, like, dude, it's 2020. It's about to be 2025 in 2 months. It's time, I feel like, as a community and professionals, you just evaluate what the defense, for a lack of a better term, is giving you and survey that and create a business plan to respond to what current circumstances are. There's so many people in our world that they do not want to prospect. It's not that they don't want to work hard. They forgot how to work hard because they didn't need to for a long period of time. And the income is a very tricky thing. You start making a lot of money with very little effort. Whew, that
Uh-huh.
is an elixir that will just have you fooled, and it can be deadly. And I don't know what the accurate number is, dude. Honestly, I don't. But I remember reading something or seeing something that it was like in those years we had 190,000 loan originators or LOs, and now there's like 50,000 or 60,000. Don't quote me on that number, but it's significantly, significantly less. And but that leads me into the next talking point, because I'm a father, you're a father. We both run businesses, right? And when things get hard, I know I'm willing to roll my sleeves up and, hey, I got to work extra. We just transitioned CRMs, and I found myself working till midnight for like a month, basically every day. But that's my personality. Like, I want it to be as good as I possibly can be. So what do you say to a father, mother, parent, whatever, that's watching this, that knows they have to work extra hard, that knows they have to make some sacrifice, but at the same time, quality of life is, and trying to create balance amongst their, and separation in between personal life and professional life?
Yeah. Man, I don't know that I always get it right. I'm doing a podcast now with a friend called Legacy Makers, a conversation for dads, and it's exactly that's a conversation where dads can think about some of these things. I give you a few thoughts. One, I think the fact that you're asking the question and that I'm asking the question, that we even are thinking about it, probably puts us further ahead. And I would just say this to a dad. We've repeated this on our podcast before, this idea that I've never met a lousy dad who's trying to be great. So I think if you're intentional, that's a big piece of it. Now, what that doesn't mean, I think something that a younger generation maybe has struggled with is they want to check ambition at the door. And I
Yeah.
think it's good for our kids to see us going after things and setting goals. And that's good for them. I think we ought to be telling them why. I think my biggest problem is this thing.
Oh yeah.
This thing. Um, and I've tried to do better at that. My kids, why they had to call me 4 times to get my attention, because my head is in my phone. But that doesn't mean I'm never going to be on my phone around them. I am trying to do better at, like, you know what? I'm not actually just scrolling Instagram right now. Like, I'm telling them, hey, I'm sorry. This is how I work. I'm responding to somebody. And that takes a little bit more effort. But, it's not easy. The balance is a tough word, because I don't know that we're ever going to be proportionally in balance. We're always going to be leaning to one or the other. But it's been said this way: this is not a problem to solve; it's a tension to manage. And the problem is, when you stop managing it, or the tension you don't feel anymore, it goes all the way in one direction. That's actually probably the time you ought to reevaluate and say, "Man, I've swung way too far one way or the other."
Yeah.
I'd be curious how you do that, because I know you're a great dad, and
Well, thank you. The truth of the matter is, dude, and being vulnerable here for a second, is that I don't feel like it. I mean, people say that to me, and I don't know if it's a self-confidence thing, but I just wonder sometimes, is that like somebody asking me how I'm doing? It's like arbitrary. You know what I mean? Like, oh, you're a great dad. Does everybody just walk around telling everybody that they're great dads? Or is that really what they see? Because sometimes, and I feel like the more I ask questions and the more I talk about it, I'm realizing just how normal it is amongst other fathers to feel like I feel. To
yeah.
where, like, I'm walking around a majority of the time with like my hair on fire. I feel like I'm failing in a large chunk of, in multiple different facets. My mom was visiting. My mom doesn't live that far away, and she was over a couple weeks ago, and it was a really stressful time for me. And it was a weekend, and I was trying very hard to be a good leader and try and provide value to the people that are on the team. But I'm also leading my household, and I'm also leading my son. And she said something that broke me almost. And she was like, your son is asking, he's starving for your attention, and you're so buried in your phone. So when you just said that about your phone, it really it hit me like a ton of bricks. And it's like, what's right? What's wrong? You know what I mean? Like, I don't want my son to grow up and be like, oh, my dad was just on his phone all the time. But the business is also how I support my family. And if I'm not present for the people that are a part of my business, or have signed up and have volunteered to come work with us, they'll find somebody who is, at least in my mind. And so it's a constant emotional, for me, tug of war. And I think the other thing that I have let go of a lot, but I see a lot more in younger, like late 20s, early 30s men, is them being so attached to the monetary aspect of whatever their profession is. They use the income level to prop up how they stack up essentially as a father or as a husband or as a man. And it's like not a coping mechanism, but it's such a source of pride to where I make X dollars. And especially in businesses like yours where you're self-employed, you can't control what you can't control. I
Yeah.
can't control markets, I can't control interest rates, I can't control inventory. So once upon a time in my life, I would have definitely, and I did definitely, attach myself to a definition of success is how much money I make. And if I can't control how much money I make and that dipped down a little mentally and emotionally, that was like freaking catastrophic for me. And it took, I mean, just like truckloads of effort to move past that mentally and realize like money is not everything. You know what I mean? And it's not. It's but at the same time, you know, try and call Bank of America and pay your mortgage with passion. And you know what I mean? Like say, hey, you know, where do I mail these high fives to? I know my mortgage payment is due. So the income aspect of it is important, but I've realized that it's not everything because you become so attached to these things that, you know, when you die, you can't take those things with you, but your family and your children and the people that are around you will carry on a legacy of who you were as a man and a leader and a father and a spouse forever.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. And I don't know, there's a quick, easy answer on it, but I think being focused on it and aware of it is the first step.
It's just a, you know, I started doing this thing about like a year ago, and I don't go out that much anymore. But you get in a social setting and you go to these school functions or birthday parties or whatever, and there's a family dynamic there, and you see fathers that you know or you're friends with or whatever. And I've found it just like so arbitrary and it's like almost monotonous to where you go and you're like, hey, Kev, what's up, dude? You know, haven't seen you for a minute. How's everything? And you're like, good. Everything's great. And you're like, how's everything? Everybody's great all the time. Right. And then you get a piece of news where maybe they're not so great, you know? And so I said one time we were in a setting and I was just going through it mentally at that, like on that exact day. And this dude was like, you know, I asked him, hey, how you doing? Good. How's the family doing? Great. We're all great, man. You know, how's work? Great. And then he reciprocated. How's everything? I'm like, yeah, not that good.
Yeah.
Right. Like really went out on a limb. And I'm like, not that good, to be honest with you. Kind of freaking sucks, if I'm being honest with you. Like I just said everything that I just said to you. Like I feel like I'm a crap father. I'm really struggling creating balance. I feel like I'm letting people down. I'm just really wrestling it with it mentally. And I mean, like on cue, it was, oh my God, me too. But this is the same dude who just said everything's great, everything's perfect. And what I have found, and I don't know if it's the same for everybody, but just allowing myself to be vulnerable and actually authentic with other people, as opposed to creating this mental and emotional force field of just this facade that everything's all good all the time, is not real life. It's just
Yeah.
not. And what I've found is that it actually has helped me create more meaningful relationships with other fathers, husbands, men, etc., who have been like, oh my gosh, this dude
Yeah.
feels the same way that I do.
Yeah. I think the challenge is now we're going to get into like a relationship. We're going to get all of this.
we're,
Let
we're
me
on
give
the
you,
merry-go-round here.
but I want to hit this. I think what you're pointing out is key, and it's part of this conversation about dads that I think is important. Moms tend to be at the other end of the spectrum. Moms almost like, and it's like they're much more open with each other. Oh, it's so hard. You won't believe what I do with the kids. These kind of things, and sometimes that can almost get. I think it's a healthier outlet to be honest with each other. But there's also times where it's like, man, all they do is complain about. You know, a mom could be like, man, all my friends just complain about being a mom. Like that's not healthy either. But guys, like we are even more quickly to talk about a challenge at work than we are at home. Like,
Why do
hey
you think
man,
that
we're
is?
having a bad quarter.
Yeah.
We're not. I'm having trouble hiring people, but we don't want to be honest about that. And I think community is something that is so lacking. There's some crazy statistic like a third of men adult men report having like not one single true friend. And so
What was that number? How
I
many?
think it's something like 33 or 35% of
Wow, that's a
adult
lot.
men say they don't have a single friend. Like
That's a lot.
we are, we're more connected than ever before and also more isolated. And so we got to have a community. We got to be able to talk about it and try to get better. So I'm glad you're leading the conversation on it.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I intend to. It's just kind of like where my brain went when we're just talking about the progression of creating, or the task of trying to find balance. I feel like realistically, if I feel this way, then I would think it's not unreasonable to think that other fathers and people of influence or in a similar position to me feel the same way. But you
Yeah.
just said something. So the community thing, that's powerful. Being a part of something that's bigger than just yourself. I think that's one of our whole drawing points and magnets here is getting around other like-minded individuals. When you're talking about joining a team doesn't have to be just a place in my mind that you work. A team can be anything that you want it to be, but being included and being in a circle of people who think the same, have the same core values, have the same beliefs, kind of like the same desired outcomes or visions for their life, that's a very, very powerful thing. I mean, that you think of like church, you think of faith. Faith is the first thing that comes to my mind. I mean, go to church on Sunday. That place is, I mean, church is packed and of any worship mechanism. So it doesn't have to be, just Christianity or Catholicism or whatever. It's any faith that somebody follows in. There is it's such a powerful thing of the belief of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah. Man, you're hitting on all the deep topics today, but it is so true. I think people really are yearning for three things. They want to know what mission am I on, who am I or on it with, and who am I becoming in the process. And that's important. It is something that I think your company does really well. Even the broader Fairway team, just people feel like they're a part of something,
Yeah,
and it's a group of people who truly believe the best in each other. They want the best for each other. And that doesn't mean it's always easy and rainbows and unicorns there. They also expect the best from each other. But when
yeah,
you do all three of those, you foster a community of people that are on a mission together.
I love that. It's true. It's one of my favorite things about being here. It's just bigger than our team. It's part of a community inside of the broader spectrum of communities.
One more thing on that mission standpoint, I'll never forget. You and I were in Dallas together. You introduced me. By the way, best introduction I've ever had. It was like it almost made it tough to speak though because you had people so hyped before I even get up there. It was amazing. You need to find that clip. You got them going. But I know that you served in the military, and that's a big part of what Fairway does is this military piece. And I use this example that I think applies beyond your industry in any world. We talked about the concept of missionaries versus mercenaries.
Oh yeah.
And I remember asking the audience, how many of you served in the military? And it was like a pretty high number, like a lot
Hmm.
more than most normal rooms. And then I asked them, how many of you would have, for a few $1,000s more a year, left the United States military to go serve the military of one of the enemies? And man, I thought those guys were going to kill me. Like they looked at me like, you moron. Like, of course we wouldn't do that. And what we reminded them is because you're on a mission. Like you're getting paid, but there's a mission that you're on. In our work, we also need to have some kind of mission because money is important. This is not like fantasy world. You talk about how you pay your mortgage. Like you gotta have money. But when money becomes the only thing that's valuable about your job, you will sell your services to the highest bidder
Yep.
and you'll immediately go down. So it's got to be both money with mission, or else we have mercenaries.
I I agree. I mean, it's something to unpack. I mean, I know we're running out of time here, but I mean, it's maybe there's a session two where we can talk about that. There's so many good things, and it's impossible to fit all of the things and all of the wisdom that you're able to kind of to leave people with and just give them good mental vitamins. It's impossible to fit that inside of 45 minutes. So who knows? Maybe we do another one. So, all right, we're almost out of time. What are you working on now?
And a couple things. One is just internally with our business, trying to, I'm trying to practice what I preach. I was at the group last week and I'm like, this is the easiest part of my job. Like the podcast, this is the easy part because we get to say it. Now we got to go live it. Like it's,
Right.
so that's one, trying to get better as our team and grow. I'm working, I have a new talk and I'm working on a new book about creating authentic connections with customers. It's interesting. We can dive into it a little bit more later, but let me give you this kind of teaser. Most people make decisions with emotion and they justify them with logic. People are far more emotional decision makers than people realize, even about some of their most important decisions like home purchases.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I think oftentimes the leaders who rise to the top are very logical. They're very fact-based. They make good decisions. And so they often discount the role that emotion plays in creating authentic connections. But when you can connect in an authentic way, which happens really through emotion, I think you're able to move people more effectively. And I think it matters in advertising, it matters in customer experience, and it also matters in employee experience. I believe what's interesting is you got two guys here in there. Are you in your 40s too?
Yes, I
You
turned
got two guys.
44 on
We
Sunday.
both married younger. You got two guys in their 40s having a conversation about dads and feelings. The leaders who are going to survive and thrive in the next several years are going to have a high emotional EQ and learn how to lead people in a new age where emotion, whether we like it or not, plays a major factor in decision making. And for the people right now who are rolling their eyes and like, I don't want to do the emotion thing, I just remind you the Army General Eric Shinshesky, who says, if you don't like change, you're going to like irrelevance even less. You may not like this, but it is true, and you got to learn to get good at it.
Yeah, I not to go tit for tat with the quotes, but I just remember why I'm not like a big Gary Vee fan. And like just how animated everything is, you know what I mean? But I do think that people look to him to be a resource for business wisdom and also leadership. He has shown the ability to scale both. And I remember watching an interview with him one time, and they asked him what did they think, or what did he think his best quality was as a leader, and without any hesitation he said empathy. And
Wow.
I can tie the empathetic aspect of someone's mentality to, it's almost a synonym for emotion. You understand what the other person might be going through, or just the ability to kind of put yourself on the other side of the fence, and you never ever know what somebody else is going through.
Very true.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, dude. I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for hanging out. And what I'll do is I'll put all your contact info on here so people can follow you. You're a great follow. You have lots of wisdom that gets shared. And dude, I appreciate your time so much.
Thanks, man. It's always a blast. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too, dude.